Good evening. Thank you for coming to the program tonight. My name's Stuart Bell, and I'm part of the Odyssey Group. Before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to remind you that in 2 weeks, we will be welcoming Adam Sykes, who will be speaking on spies, lies, and the literary world. I encourage you to join us, and please bring a friend. Let's keep expanding the community around Odyssey. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Ken Roberts. I met Ken 20 years ago in Miami when I was working for a company that produced import-export trade data from South America. And I heard about the company World City. But when I went to go see Ken, I realized that his presentations immediately struck me with his ability to take vast sets of data and transform them into meaningful insights. Ken also has the gift of making the complex understandable through his storytelling. So please join me in welcoming Ken Roberts from World City.
There we go. Thank you for having me. Stuart, thank you for the warm introduction. Stuart and I did meet 20 years ago in Miami, and it was through Stuart and his company at the time that I took what we were doing in Miami and took it around the country, and that was taking basic government data and telling airports and seaports and border crossings around the country what happened at their ports. You would have thought they knew that, right? But they didn't necessarily need to know that, and they didn't always know that. So we became a real nice resource for them as they tried to expand, and they tried to ask for additional government money to build an additional bridge or to build an additional terminal, whatever it might be. I'm just curious, how many of you at any point have worked for a company that dealt with international trade directly? And I'll repeat it for everybody, but what did you do, sir? Third-party logistics company or 3PL. Who else raised their hand?
Well, we import steel and make it into machines that are sold internationally.
You import steel still? Oh, okay. Well, good luck.
I work for Colgate-Palmolive.
Yes, correct.
I worked for Colgate-Palmolive, and we sold a lot of toothpaste overseas.
He worked for Colgate-Palmolive and sold a lot of toothpaste overseas. Anybody else? So quite a few. Yes, sir.
I was with Pfizer and Raytheon.
Pfizer and Raytheon. So drugs and planes. Or planes or
Defense systems.
defense systems. There you go. Better. Anybody else? Automotive. Same, automotive. Somebody shy over here. Catheters, medical equipment. Okay. Medical equipment's a big export and a big import. So we got quite a few. Anybody over here? These are the people near the bar, so I don't know what they're doing over here. Anybody here do anything? No, not in that trade? Okay, so we got some people who know something about international trade. So I decided to call this, what exactly does $5 trillion in annual trade say about us? And the little slogan of our company, World City is the company name, and ustradenumbers.com is our website, data-driven storytelling made simple. So I'll tell you a little bit. You might not be able to read this fully in the back, but I'll go through it very quickly. So what we do is we do a lot of things. We produce publications. So here's a publication for a seaport on the west coast of Florida, Seaport Manatee. And it's just a little flyer that they hand out to potential customers. And if you'd open it up, it's got a nice map in there of the world, and it shows what countries they trade with. Okay? And then similar one for Houston Intercontinental Airport, one for the United States at large, so it's more data in there. And then for Port Laredo, which we'll talk about in a minute, a full publication. So this one's 64 pages with lots and lots of data in there. And then for a little town in Texas called Eagle Pass, it's an abbreviated version called the Executive Summary. And then Port Everglades, which is just down the street, figuratively. We do one that folds out into a big poster with all sorts of data there as well. But what has happened is most of what we do now is digital. So where we used to do 10 or 12 of those publications a year, the 64-page ones were down to one, and I cannot convince that client to stop buying it, but they keep buying the thing every year. Are you sure you want to do this? Because it's a lot of work for us, and I'd rather do it the other way. So we produce publications for them. We also have our data that we produce for LAX and MIA, and DFW, and IAH, which is Houston, and Port Laredo, and Port Hueneme, California, and who else am I leaving out? Port Everglades. We have our data, which you'll see in a minute, some of it, that goes on their websites. So we're almost like a wire service for trade data for these companies, so we do that as well. So a little bit about me. I founded the company in 1998 and had no idea I'd still be doing this all these years later. That was not the business plan. It was 3 to 4 years in and out, but here we are 25 years later. For the last 8 or 9 years, I've written a column, supposedly 5 times a month for Forbes.com on international trade, and you'll see some of those columns in the presentation here in a minute. And I served on the 12-person Federal Reserve Board's Trade and Transportation Advisory Board for 2 3-year terms. And I was the only one on there that really didn't have any direct interaction like all these other people with the trade itself, but I just had the data, and so they wanted me to come talk about the data. Whoops, went too fast. Let's see if we can go back. Oh man, did it go fast. Oh my God, oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. So we'll talk about 3 things today. We'll do a quick overview of U.S. trade. So the annual data was released on the 5th, so 1 week ago basically. The annual data for the year was released, and that's what this will be based on for 2024. I am promising you some excellent cocktail party trivia. And we're going to do a little trade magic, sort of, not really, at some point, and be ready for this. If you're not interested, keep your head down. I'm going to ask for a volunteer, 2 volunteers, that's the magic part, to come up, and we're going to talk about some aspects of trade, all right? So the first, how many people got a cell phone with them? Who's got their cell phone? Oh, good. So what I want you to do is pull out your cell phone and go to slido.com. You won't regret this. Slido.com, and enter that 7-digit code. I'll give you just a minute. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about the data we use. So the data we use, Customs and Border Protection, every time an export leaves this country or enters this country, it has to pass through them, right? And so every export or import has a 10-digit code to tell them what it is, what the value is, et cetera, et cetera. That data is given to the U.S. Census Bureau, and Census makes it available. And we take that data and use it at what's called the 4-digit level rather than the 10-digit level. The 4-digit level, to give you an idea, at the 4-digit level, there's more than 1,260 different exports and 1,260 different imports. So you can imagine what the 10-digit level would be like. It'd be impossible to deal with. Is everybody ready? Everybody who wants to go to Slido is there? Anybody having a problem? Enter 1522603, 1522603. This is going to be for online polling. I'm going to ask a question. It's entirely anonymous. You get to answer what you think is the correct answer, and we'll see how you guys do, okay? So question number 1, all right? And if you still want to join, there's the number again, and you can also, if you can get the QR code, you can do it that way too. So U.S. trade was $5.33 trillion last year, $5.33 trillion. So I'll explain this question a little bit. So we all know there's a big trade deficit. Everybody knows that, right? But this is going to talk about the balance of that trade. So it's a pie, and what percentage of that pie is exports, and what percentage of that pie is imports. So people are already answering there. So 29% was an export, 71% was an import, 19% was a U.S. export, and 81% was an import, and then 39% was a U.S. export, and 61% was an import. All 3 of those would suggest a trade deficit, obviously, and they are closely linked, but they're a different thing. So we've got 18 people who've responded. That's the number in the upper right corner, 19. So we'll give it a little more time because there's quite a few of you here, and I think we'll find that you find this quite interesting. So at the moment, 29% is the answer that seems to be the most popular, but the others are coming along too. It's like a little horse race on your screen live. Kind of fun, right? This is not really happening. I'm just making this up. But it makes you feel good, right? It makes you feel like you have a say in things, right? You're doing nothing. So there's a very first question is the data that I'm talking about involves services or just what we call merchandise trade? This is all merchandise trade, and we should talk about that because it's a very good point because as we talk about trade, we generally think of merchandise trade, and service trade is very hard to quantify and track. And yet, if you go anywhere in the world, American brands are everywhere, right? American brands are everywhere. And anytime a tourist comes from outside this country and comes to the United States and they spend money here, that is a U.S. export. Anytime a student goes to a college here from outside this country, that's a U.S. export. So there's all sorts of ways to look at it. It's very hard to track. So we got 35 of it. Anybody want a little more time or any more explanation? So 43% of you right now say that 29% of U.S. Was a U.S. export and 71% was an import. The next one is 39% was a U.S. export and 61% an import. And some of you think 19%. Anybody else want to take a minute? Should I go? Got 35. We're going to hope for a better turnout on the next question. All right? So trade balance versus trade deficit. I've been sort of talking about that a little bit, right? So the correct answer is 39% is an export. And what you'll find about that number is over time, the U.S. trade deficit has continued to grow and grow and grow. And it bothers people. But in that last 20 years that I've been tracking this stuff, the balance has gone from roughly 35 cents on the dollar to 41 cents on the dollar. It barely moves because exports are growing along with imports. And right now it's sort of at the high end. It's at 39%. It's been as high as 40 and 41, as I say, and fairly recently. Okay? But then I wrote this column for Forbes. And by the way, this photo was Photoshopped because those two men were never standing next to each other and smiling. They never smiled in each other's presence. But anyway, I wrote a story for Forbes 4 days ago, I guess. U.S. had biggest trade deficits with these 10 nations in 2024. Who wants to guess the 4 nations? China. India is not one, but we do have a deficit with India. Canada, we have a deficit, but is not one of the top 4. Mexico. Vietnam. And the last one's tough. And now I'm forgetting. I think it's Japan, but I hope I'm right. I think it's Japan, but it could be somebody else. But anyway, but here's what's also true. We have more trade surplus. We have trade surpluses with more countries than we have deficits with. We have trade surpluses with, let's see if I can make this work. There it is right there with 132 nations and only deficits with 101. And that's 5 better than last year if you consider surplus is good and deficit's bad. But we have quite large deficits, as I said, with 4 nations. But China's is very, very big. And it used to be 5 times bigger than any other countries. And now it's only half as big as Mexico's, much bigger. Because of the trade war, China's deficit has come way down, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And Mexico's has gone way up. All right, so overview of U.S. trade. So here I'm going to show you some visualizations from our website, ustradenumbers.com, of the United States' top trade partners, top ports, top exports, and top imports. Okay? Anybody think they know who the top trade partner is? Who's the top trade country? Do anybody know? Canada, Mexico. Any others? Anybody know who the top port is? And that's airports, seaports, and border crossings. Los Angeles. Baltimore. Somebody in Texas? Eagle Pass? Eagle Pass is next door. Laredo it is. And then top exports and top imports. And I say here, bonus points if you can remember the top 1 and 3 of these 4 categories at the end of the presentation, but don't write it down. Okay, so here's the top trade partners in 2024. The top 3, just those top 3. And these are the ones Trump focuses on, right? And there's a reason, because these are the big boys. The top 3 account for 41% of U.S. trade, and that figure is roughly constant for the last handful of years. And Mexico just became this year, you probably can't read it in the back, but Mexico became the first trade partner to do $800 billion in trade with the United States. $800 billion. Okay? Canada, now if you go back to every year of this century, Canada has been the #1 trade partner 17 times. Historically, Canada was the #1 trade partner for the U.S. year after year after year after year. Then came China, and then came Mexico. Mexico, this is its second year in a row and third year total, and China's been number one this century for 5 or 6 times. 17, 5, and 3. 17, 5, and 3, there you go. But then you see Germany, Japan. So what this is showing you is by value, not by weight, by value, the trade with these countries, and those blocks represent the value of that. So Mexico's block is bigger than, but then you see Germany, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and United Kingdom, India. There's India. So Trump announces 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, then kind of pulls back and says, I'll give you 30 days to come up with a plan, right? To how you're going to deal with fentanyl and illegal immigration. So I wrote a story about that, and it said, new tariff war, Canada, Mexico, top market for 72% of U.S. export categories, not the value, but the number of categories. 72% of those, either Canada or Mexico is the number one U.S. export partner. So generally speaking, when I'm going to be talking today, if I use the term export, I mean leaving the United States, and import, I mean coming in. So even if I'm talking about China, I will call it a Chinese import into the United States, as opposed to it is their export, but I'll call it an import into the U.S. So they top the mark for 72% of all export categories. China or Mexico are number one. So that's why I had written a column previously that said, this is either before or right after the election. Right after the election, Trump's Mexico and Canada tariffs may be far riskier than those on China, because China, the percentage of imports that they send, the percent of exports we send to them is relatively small compared to what we send to Mexico and Canada, right? And this little type down here at the bottom says, this was my second paragraph in this column, while the announcement is almost certainly bluster to bring additional attention to illegal immigration and fentanyl smuggling over the U.S.-Mexico border, there are several reasons why this is risky. And that's sort of what happened, right? As we know now, he likes to negotiate, and this is how he negotiates. All right, top 3 ports. We have an airport, a seaport, and a border crossing to the top 3. So Port Laredo did $339 billion in trade. How many of you have been to Laredo? Anybody been to Laredo? I can't imagine anybody has, but you have? A couple. Okay. So Laredo's a relatively small place, right? It's got some bridges, and they're doubling their bridges now. They've got a 8-lane bridge they're taking to 18 lanes. They do 12,000 trucks every day each way. And it all goes up I-35, okay? So a huge volume of trade through this little town that is in turn next to Eagle Pass. Is that what you say? Eagle Pass, next to Eagle Pass. Port of Los Angeles is number 2 and has historically been number 1 until 2 years ago. Last year, the 2024 data is the second year that they've been number 1. Before that, it had always been Port of Los Angeles. O'Hare International is an enormous amount of trade. Who do you think O'Hare trades with? What country? Any guesses? China. A lot of Chinese stuff coming in. Port of Los Angeles is also China, and Port Laredo is, of course, Mexico. 95%, 98% of Port Laredo's trade is with Mexico. It's almost 100%. And they do about a third of all Mexican trade right there at Port Laredo. Top exports. So they topped, yeah, there you go. Okay, so top exports. Exports top $2 trillion for the second or third year in a row. $2 trillion of exports, and civilian aircraft and parts are number 1. And that one surprised me a little bit. Why do you think that would surprise me, that they would be, and historically was number 1 for a long time? Because Boeing has had so many troubles in the recent years, right? So this is I think the first or second year it's been back. I think it's the first year back on top. So it's a good sign, but I looked into the data a little bit deeper. So remember I told you, this is at the 4-digit level, this description. If you go into the 10-digit level, what you see is it's a lot of parts more than a lot of planes. So Boeing still hasn't, as if you read the news, hasn't fully recovered from what's happened. Oil is the number 2 export by value. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then gasoline and other fuels. Low value shipments, the 4th one, that is basically e-commerce. That is courier, FedEx, UPS, DHL kind of stuff, but it's also e-commerce. So that one has been moving up in the rankings. And then natural gas and LNG. And I distinguish those two because LNG is what goes on the tankers. It's liquefied and goes on the tankers. The natural gas goes in pipelines. So pipeline stuff's going to go to Mexico and Canada. And LNG, for example, can go to Europe as part of the whole Ukraine war situation, right? Passenger vehicles, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then plasma vaccines and blood sounds terrible. But blood fractions is the way to think about that. So like white blood cells and stuff like that. And you'll see quite a few of these on both sides of the export and import category. We trade a lot of the things back and forth. So imports are also at 3 trillion again. And on my way out from Miami today, I saw, I think, pretty much every one of those cars on the road with me. It was crazy. And oil is that was a joke. And oil is number 2. Computers and cell phones is kind of interesting. A few years ago, cell phones actually passed computers in the value, and now it's flipped again. Computers are back ahead of cell phones, and I think there's some challenges in the cell phone space of, do I really need another new phone? Can't I just use this one I got? Isn't it good enough, right? And then there you see plasma vaccines and blood again. You see medicines and individual dosages, some of that Pfizer stuff probably in there somewhere. Motor vehicle parts, gasoline, computer parts, and again, that's 3 trillion. So 2 trillion, 3 trillion, that's 5 trillion, and that's where you see your split of roughly 39%. So I split it out real quickly by seaports and airports and border crossings, and I won't dwell on this but the concept is a very simple one. If it's very valuable and lightweight and you don't want it in anybody else's hands for too long, you put it on a plane. So these are the imports by air. So then you see plasma vaccines and blood fractions pop to the top, cell phones and related equipment, computers, medicine, individual dosages, those things. And if you look at this one, it'll be land or border crossings, then it gets into the heavier stuff, right? That can go by rail or can go by pipeline or can go by truck. And it'll be in land in particular will do a lot with the automotive industry. And that's why when you talk about these steel tariffs that were mentioned, one of the industries that's paying very close attention to steel tariffs is the automotive industry. Because anybody uses steel as an input into their finished product is a little bit nervous about the price of steel going up, because Trump in his first term, Bush in his term, there have been tariffs put on steel before, and it tends not to go well. It seems like a good idea. You're protecting steel workers' jobs. Sounds like a good idea, but it turns out there's a whole lot more workers who are working outside the steel industry who need that steel, right? Would you agree with me, or you think I'm wrong? He agrees, okay. You can disagree if you want. All right, now let's talk about some excellent cocktail party trivia, all right? And that's probably overselling this a little bit, but you'll still enjoy it. Okay, here we go, another question. So let me explain this one a little bit to you, but you'll catch on pretty quickly. So there's 3 types of energy that we import and export. One is going to be the oil. One is going to be when they refine it, which is the gasoline and other types of fuel. And the third one is going to be the natural gas, okay? And so the question is, do we have a deficit or a surplus with those things, right? Does the U.S. export more of those things or import more of those things? And so here are 3 options. The first option is we import more oil than we export. We import more gasoline than we export, but we export more natural gas. The second one is we import more oil and gasoline, but we export more natural gas. And the third one is we import more oil, but export more gasoline and natural gas. Okay? A little complicated, but the idea is, what do you think we export more of and what do you think we import more of? Because you hear a lot of talk these days about energy self-sufficiency, right? We produce all the energy we need. Oh, look at this, 33, 33, 33. And this is getting a lot of people thinking, because we've only got 6 responses so far, so now we're up to 12. So the first one is we import more oil and we import more gasoline, but we do export more natural gas. The second, we import more of oil and gasoline, but export more natural gas. I think I said that wrong. And the third one is we import more oil, but export more gasoline and natural gas. More oil and gasoline. Yeah, I did say that wrong. The first one is just oil. Oil and gasoline is the first one. It's a tough one, but I think it'll be, like I say, that you will be able to amaze your friends with this information. How many here have friends? All right, everybody's in who wants to be in? And by the way, if you still want to join in at any time, you just go to Slido and enter those 7 numbers there and you're in like Flint. And there's only one more question after this. And it involves alcohol, so. All right, so we'll jump to the next screen. Okay, so energy trade. Okay, so here's a chart. Now what you see on your left is the top is exports, and beneath it is imports. And you can see their rank in the first column, so they rank very high, except natural gas as an import's not very high. And the value, and then if you look at the second column, oil is a deficit, and gasoline and natural gas are surpluses. And if you look at the bottom quadrant there, you see 86%, almost 87% of the trade in natural gas is a U.S. export. That's the bottom figure. And the second figure is 67, so about 2/3% of all the gasoline trade is an export. And 41% of all the trade in oil is actually an export now. So the correct answer was, now you know it, we have a surplus in gasoline and natural gas, but not oil. So what does that look like? So this chart shows you from 2006 to the present, oil on the top in orange, and oil exports on top in the orange, and oil imports on top in the orange, and oil exports on the bottom in blue. And you can see how close they're getting to each other. And you can see by the chart, the blue horizontal lines chart. What I did there is I took from our website a chart that says here in the month of December, which is the most current data for December, for the last 11 or 12 years is the value of oil exports. And you can see from 2013 at the top to 2024 at the bottom, that trajectory. Why did that happen? What happened? Well, I think a few of us in this room are old enough to remember the oil embargo in the 1970s, right? And since that time, we said, we don't export oil anymore, right? We're not going to do it. And then in the Obama administration, he said, let's export oil. And at about the same time, fracking came along in Texas, in Pennsylvania, in North Dakota, and right? And so suddenly, the United States became the powerhouse in energy production, right? And that has all sorts of implications. So here's a chart that shows where we export oil to. And before the trade war with China, it ranked number 1. They bought more of our oil than any other country at 19%. And they now buy 5.2%. There was anybody from the Midwest here? Probably some Midwesterners here somewhere, right? If there are, anyway, the other thing that happened in that China trade war is they stopped buying our soybeans for a period of time. They're back to buying our soybeans. But so whereas what Trump did was sort of say, essentially, and I'm oversimplifying, all imports from China are going to be hit with a tariff. What the Chinese did is said, this is my opinion, where are the U.S. exports coming from, which states that supported Trump? And we're going to target those things. We're going to target the Midwest and soybeans. We're going to target oil, which to some extent is going to be Texas. So this has not come back because China is now getting its oil from where? Russia. And so now there's this sort of unholy alliance between China and Russia, and it involves Ukraine, and it makes for quite an interesting geopolitical situation. So I wrote a story then for Forbes, again, 2024, U.S. oil imports from Middle East hit new record low. Why don't we get oil from the Middle East like we used to? Because we're producing it here. Okay, so it used to be, just a few years ago, 24% of our oil came from the Middle East. It's down right at about 10% now. Where do we get most of our oil from? Anybody know? What country? Imported oil. Canada. I heard there's, how many Canadians in the room? I heard there's some Canadians here. All right, we'll be talking a little about you Canadians. In a very nice way, by the way, for the most part. So here's what happened. So since 2016, Saudi Arabia's, the value of Saudi Arabia oil imports have dropped to almost 62%. From Kuwait, 67%. From Iraq, 52%. And from Egypt, 100%. So we're getting very little oil from the Middle East anymore. So it has all sorts of geopolitical implications, right? If we don't need Middle Eastern oil, what does that mean for those countries? What does it mean for Israel? Right? All right, here we go. Another question for you. For which of these was the import value the greatest in 2024? Beer, wine, or spirits? Imports, just imports. And not about how much you consumed last night, just beer, wine, or imports. And by the way, I didn't say this at the beginning, which I usually do, but if you have any questions for me at any point, just raise your hand. And somebody's got a microphone, or should I walk back here and go ahead? Oh, here's the microphone. He's coming around to you. So just your name and your social security number is all we need.
Thank you. Are we on?
Okay. Go ahead with that question.
Can you hear me?
I can
Okay,
hear you.
Good. So the prior chart showed that imports from the Middle East are way down.
Yes.
Of gas.
Of oil.
Of oil. So where is that oil going now? Do you have any sense of who the new customers are that are replacing us?
That's a good question. I would guess, I know to some extent it's going to be India and China, but there's probably others as well. The developing world, one thing that's happened over the last few decades through globalization, and again, this is sort of a pivot point we're at in our history right now. For the last 70 years, we've sort of felt rising waters lift all boats was sort of the credo, right? And what we're now thinking is, why are we paying for everybody else's troubles, right? Why can't we take care of our own troubles here? So I'm trying to put that in the best possible light for each opinion of that, right? And so there's some question about, how do you want to play this, and what's the risk of allowing our friends to not be our friends? So it looks like a lot of people think you guys are big wine drinkers, I think what the deal is. All right, so here we go. Beer, 7.53 billion, up 9. I'm not saying it's the answer yet. I'm just telling you what the total is. Up 9.75% in 2024. Why does it come from Mexico? Did that surprise you? Why? Because right across the border from Eagle Pass, Texas, is the world's largest brewery. And it's owned by Constellation Brands, an American company. And Constellation Brands bought that right to sell in the United States when Anheuser-Busch, no, not Anheuser-Busch, somebody may know more about this, when there was who bought Anheuser-Busch? Yes, you know the story. So they had to divest what they were going to sell in the U.S., Modelo and Corona. So, I toured this last year, and it's enormous. I mean, you can't believe how big this place is just to make beer. Netherlands is 2, Ireland's 3. All right, so that's 7.53 billion. Wine is below beer, and that's 6.79 billion, but it's up at 1.5%. And France and Italy are the big guys with about, 70%? But I'm sure some of you like your New Zealand wine and your Spanish wine, your Australian wine, your Argentinian, Chilean wine. And it does include Prosecco and Champagne. I'm just telling you. And so as the world dealt with coronavirus, better known as COVID-19, there's Corona. That became the #1 beer. I think Modelo is actually the bigger seller, but it was just right in the middle of COVID is when beer passed wine for the first time. And it was sort of ironic that the Corona and coronavirus. But spirits is the biggest of the 3. It's a big one. And wait a minute, what's coming from Mexico? Tequila. What about France? What about brandy? And UK, probably Scotch? Yep. So there you go. What comes from Canada, you Canadians? Tell me that. Bourbon. Okay. Yeah, there you go. All right, so now the trade magic. I need 2 volunteers, a man and a woman. Does anybody want to volunteer to come stand with me for just a minute and help make this fun? Oh, come on. Be a sport. Who's coming up here? It's not painful. I won't embarrass you much. I don't know any family secrets. Here comes a guy. Okay. Hi, I'm Ken. Jim. All right, Jim. And your name is, ma'am? Laura. I met her at dinner. Okay, I just tried to act like it was not all set up because the magic trick, right? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So blouses, you don't have a blouse on, but that's all right. If you had a blouse on, blouses mainly come from Asia and some from Central America. Here's the countries they come from, right? So when you go home tonight, if you have, no matter what you're wearing, man or woman, do you do like I do every night and check where your stuff comes from? Yeah, right? I had this sports jacket from Canada that I kept just way beyond the time you should keep a sports jacket because I said, what's the chance of having a sports jacket made in Canada, right? But anyway, so Vietnam, Indonesia, Guatemala, China, 6%. Now, let's go back to 2016, okay, and see what happens. 2 things are at work here. One, the Chinese are deciding they don't want to be in apparel much anymore. It's not a high enough market for them, right? So they don't want to be in apparel. They want to move to the higher value. They want to move to cell phones and computers and TV monitors, stuff like that. So Vietnam's market share increased from 24% to 28%, Guatemala from 1 to 9, Nicaragua from 0.2 to 8, and China from 21 down to 9%. So the likelihood that you have a Chinese blouse on tonight, is far less likely than it would have been, unless you're holding on to your clothes for a while. All right, so now let's say your shirt, okay? You're not, oh, you can see the screen. So shirts now come from Bangladesh and Vietnam. That's 39, another 12% from India. You're at roughly half the total. China's at 9%. Let's go back to 2016. In Bangladesh, market share went from 20% to 23%, Vietnam from 11 to 16, India from 7 to 12, and China dropped from 23 to 10. Again, they're getting out of the business. So let's see, what's next? Probably dresses. Where do you think your dress came from? Vietnam. Any other guesses? Canada. China. So China is number 1, still at 28%, but Vietnam's at 24%. So right there, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Thailand. Notice the countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, right, Indonesia. So part of what is going on, not so much with apparel, but with a lot of higher tech goods, is what's called the rules of origin. What is made in Mexico, made in China? There's some question whether some of these things are really being done in China, but the final assembly being done somewhere, and there's some questions about how that's playing out. But so let's look back to 2016. China was at 47% just 8 years ago, but Vietnam has increased from 6 to 24, Indonesia from 6 to 12. Men's underwear. China, probably. Might be some Vietnamese underwear, and could be some Indian underwear. Who knows, right? But there's no significant change in that category. A few points here, one way or the other. And now we're going to do the same for you, sorry. I went backwards?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's dresses.
You had women's underwear before.
Oh, I do. Oh, sorry. Sorry, you're not wearing women's underwear, are you? No. Okay, good. There's men's underwear. Here's men's underwear. No significant change, men's underwears. And, all right, so that's men's underwear. Let's go now to... Okay, there we go. Dresses and skirts. Did we do this already? Dresses and skirts.
But
So-
I think it was a different.
Hold on. Okay. We did this. Let's go to here. Men's pants. Again, Bangladesh. Men's pants. Bangladesh still dressing your man. Bangladesh 23, Vietnam. And again, if you look back to 2016, China's fallen from 19 to 11%. Bangladesh up from 18 to 23. Vietnam 10 to 14. And Pakistan. Question. Yes, sir. And I'll repeat the question.
So you mentioned earlier that
Land.
China decided it wanted to get into higher value products.
Yes.
Do you have any sense of how much that decision was driven by the fact that Americans may not want to buy as much Chinese goods? In other words, demand decline versus a supplier decision.
I think they saw greater profitability and possibilities outside of apparel.
Really their decision.
I think that'd be my guess. Apparel is a tough probably way. I mean, if you think about the apparel industry in this country, it started in the Northeast, then it sort of went to the South, then it went sort of Dominican Republic and Mexico, Central America, and then it went to Asia. It keeps that's the production of apparel is the one product that keeps moving around the world to find the people who are at the sort of the bottom of the supply chain, right? Leather shoes, Vietnam, way up. China was 49% down to 20%. There's a very good chance you're wearing Vietnamese shoes at any given moment. Athletic shoes, sort of the same story. Vietnam from 27 to 45, China from 59 to 36. Diamonds, not really apparel, but something women probably like to put on their finger, right? India is where they're all coming from these days. India has sort of taken over the diamond market, not taken over completely. Israel's still at 26% and Belgium at 11%. But years ago, a lot of those diamonds came into LAX, and that has all now shifted back to JFK. So the Indians are bringing them into JFKs, just like the Israelis were and the Belgians were. Cars, and here's one that's kind of interesting. Here you see cars from everywhere. Interestingly enough, the first and fourth ranked, Mexico and Canada, don't really have any cars that are of their country, right? But that's the NAFTA USMCA supply chain, the most integrated supply chain in the world. They say that the average car goes back and forth across a border, or parts of it do 7 times before it's a car, right? But what has happened since 2016? Mexico's market share has risen from 14 to 23%, South Korea from 9 to 17%, Slovakia from 1 to 2.9%, and Canada's has fallen from 27 to 13%. While we were having dinner, someone asked about the Port of Baltimore, and Port of Baltimore finished the year #1 for vehicle imports, passenger vehicle imports, which is pretty impressive because of what happened there in, is that March? Is that when that was? I mean, it shut that port down, and so I did a column at that time on where those things that needed to get into that port but couldn't were likely to go. Because that's if anything good came out of COVID, is that we proved our supply chains were actually relatively supple. They could maneuver, they could change, they could figure out ways. I mean, it was sort of painful for some of us, particularly when we couldn't find toilet paper. But it was a painful time on some level and people got sick and died, of course, but it proved that supply chains were nimble, and they will probably have to prove that again. Okay, so top trade partner is Mexico. Top port is Laredo. Top export is
Oil? No.
It's because of an industry that has been a long dominant industry in this country, but they had some challenges within one of the big players. Planes and parts. Top import is cars. So we export more gasoline and refined petroleum products as well as LNG and natural gas than we import, right? We export more. Thank you very much. How about a round of applause? Weren't they great?
Quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
One of the first things you put in there was the 16% that was coming from Mexico. What percentage of that 16%, if you know, constitutes American products that have gone over 1, 2, or 7 times that are now coming back for the final time?
And we're talking strictly about motor vehicles and from United States and parts.
No, not necessarily.
Oh.
Anything
Well.
that comes from an American company that went to Mexico to be assembled in its finality
Okay.
and is now coming back.
So I'll tell you a little story. So I told you about the big brewery on the other side of Eagle Pass. So 50% of all the beer that enters this country goes through Eagle Pass, Texas. Eagle Pass doesn't have an airport. I have to go there a couple of times a year. I fly into San Antonio and drive 2 hours to get to Eagle Pass, okay? But 50% of the beer comes through Eagle Pass. But guess what port leads the nation in U.S. exports of malt? Eagle Pass. Guess what port leads the nation in the export of fructose, or the kind of sugars you need to make beer? Eagle Pass. Guess what port leads the nation in motor vehicle part exports? Port Laredo. So engines, not carburetors anymore, but shock absorbers, windshield wipers, there's all sorts of things that go from the U.S. to Mexico and vice versa. So all sorts of things that are inputs go in before the final product comes out. And they can be U.S. products, and they can also be foreign products, technically. We also manufacture a tremendous number of foreign cars in this country, right? I mean, almost anybody you can think of is here, somewhere, usually in the South. Right, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. They're all through those, Hyundai, Honda, Toyota, BMW is in just outside of Spartanburg, Greenville, Spartanburg. Mercedes in Alabama, In fact, during the trade war, the Chinese stopped taking some of the BMWs that were leaving from Greenville, Spartanburg area at the Port of Charleston. So all sorts of things get caught up in these things. But yeah, so in terms of an actual number, I don't know. But the notion is very much so that very few, in fact, USMCA, when it was passed, is nearly identical to NAFTA, but there's some important changes, right? And one of those is that any car produced, or any, it just applied to cars, I think, but cars produced had to have, I think it started at 60% and goes to 75% over time, and I'll probably have the numbers a little bit wrong, but you get the idea, of parts that come from within the Canada, Mexico, US hemisphere, right? And the primary goal of that was to keep out Chinese parts. Because when you look at motor vehicle parts that come into this country, they come from 3 countries primarily: China, Mexico, and Canada. So the idea was, let's try to block off China. That was even the goal of, you may recall, when Obama was still a president, he'd put together this group of countries that were going to be a trade pact, largely Asian countries, but some in South America, to sort of, again, wall off China a little bit. So that effort is a long going, and Trump came in and said, we're going to do the same, but we're going to do it through tariffs. And Biden kept those tariffs in place largely, right? Largely kept them in place. Yes, sir.
I've been an importer and a manufacturer all my life.
Okay, we're going to get the microphone to you, right? I think that's a good idea.
First of all,
Importer and manufacturer most of his life.
a long time.
Long time. No, it doesn't look that long.
First of all, the reason behind Vietnam and China manufacturing is China is shipping their materials
Yep.
to Vietnam.
Correct.
So that number is not a real fair number, because the only way China is getting rid of their labor, and that's why the number is so much higher in Vietnam.
Right.
It's not because of the manufacturing. Second
A
point,
lot of the parts that are being assembled in Vietnam
the
are coming from
soft goods-
China.
Soft goods
Yep.
are being sent there.
Yep.
And they're either being submarined or transshipped and mislabeled and
Yep.
saying they're out of Vietnam to miss quotas and duties.
And they're trying their best to stop that, but it's very difficult to deal with it.
And 807,
Same thing's happening in Mexico.
And 807 and things of that type of nature, it's value added. So we have to make.
You need to tell them what 807 is.
807, the United States turned around and said they wanted to manufacture product in the United States. We couldn't manufacture product in the United States because we don't have the factories to manufacture the product. So what they accepted was pieces to manufacture. So you'd go to a battery manufacturer who would send it out. You cut the fabric in the United States,
right.
and say you were adding value. But it doesn't work that way. They have the transshipments, which they mislabel the goods. So these numbers up here, there are duties. Where does the duty and the tariff go? In China, we always pay 22% anything that comes out of China. If you bring a car into China, you pay 57%. So where are those duties and tariffs in your numbers?
They're not, the duties and tariffs are,
I can give you other examples. I mean, but we understand the duties and tariffs. So when we turn around and say we're adding duties and tariffs,
they're in these
here,
numbers.
They're in the numbers
Right.
to go to China, and somebody gets that money.
Right. When an import comes in and there's a
Chinese
tariff, it
government
goes
gets
to our
that.
treasury. Yep.
Yeah, so the Chinese government gets 53% on every car that goes in.
And this is what Trump is now talking about,
Well,
right?
that's what he's
Reciprocal trade.
Right.
If you want a tariff on us of, by the way, the country that I think has the fourth largest, one of the countries that has one of the largest trade imbalances is Ireland. Very high imbalance. Vietnam's the highest,
Vietnam's the highest because they don't make any.
and Ireland's number 2.
They have 2 factories, and everybody says they make the same amount of product as China. I mean, it's, you know, it's not realistic. So the numbers, I think, are a little bit misleading that China is the manufacturing capital of the world right now in garments. They're not.
China is not. Vietnam is not, you mean?
Yeah, Vietnam is
Vietnam is not.
Vietnam.
Right.
I would think India is a lot bigger than Vietnam right now.
I just spent a lot of time on the phone with someone from the Census Department looking at the census data, and I said, how are you guys going to know what things that are going into products that are coming to the United States, back to your question, are coming from China? And we went round and around for weeks, and I don't think we have a good way to track that like we should. And it is very hard. And in some areas will be gray. Some of it's outright lying and thievery, right? But some of it's going to be gray areas because, you know, when do you add value to a product? The idea, so the basic idea is if you take a part and you put it in something and it substantially changes that thing and makes it more valuable, then the thing can be, you can say that thing was made in that second country. So if the Chinese give some buttons for a shirt, and the Vietnamese put the buttons on the shirt, they can say, well, the shirt now has greater value than those buttons did, so we can say made in Vietnam. I think that's my phone, by the way. Yeah, but, yeah. Right. Yes, sir.
In the last 5 to 10 years, many corporations have adopted good practices in terms of importing from foreign countries that may have not the strictest labor laws or
Yes.
things like that. What impact, if any, have the corporations who have imposed those policies or otherwise had on either the shifting of practices, or have they improved things or not?
And I feel really embarrassed, but could you repeat the question? Because I was thinking about my phone that was ringing. It was driving me nuts.
Sure. In the last 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
many corporations have enacted provisions that require them to, you know, only import or buy from companies where the manufacturing
Yes, okay.
abroad has strict labor, comply with labor laws.
Right.
They do
Gotcha,
things like
okay.
that. Those good practices. What impact has that had on trade? Do you think it's been material or not? Is that a worthwhile endeavor to pursue, or has it not been?
I think there are companies that care about it and want to care about it. I think that we fool ourselves if we don't. We can look at it 2 ways. We can say, we're going to act like we don't know that these people are working for peanuts in these countries to make the things that we use in our lives, right? That $5 trillion, $3 trillion of imports, right? Some of that's produced by people who get paid very poorly. And by the way, the new USMCA agreement was the first ever to have labor provisions like it does on the Mexicans and rights to unionize and so forth. And the second way is to say, look, these people were dirt poor before we gave them the opportunity to make these things for us. So a guy who might have made $1 a day now makes $2 a day, right? And you think, well, that still sucks. But if you're making $1 a day and you're now making $2 a day, you're thinking, I'm thankful to make $2 a day. So you have to think about that piece of it and how you feel about that. But if, you know, I think what you're talking about is sort of the child labor and some of the practices, particularly in China. I think it's very hard to police. I mean, I think there's attempts to police it, but I think it's very hard to police. I think companies would like to be, some companies in particular would like to be better at it, particularly when they get heat from shareholders or from citizens or whatever, media. I don't mean to be skeptical, but yeah, there's a question here. Yes, sir. He's going to get the microphone too. The poor guy's going to get the biggest workout of the night. Back, there you go.
Thank you very much. So why is a trade deficit a bad thing? Let's
How many,
assume-
how many think a trade deficit is a bad thing? How many are not sure? How many think it's a good thing? Okay.
Yeah, I just had the question because
And those who
assume we have
said they're
an
not
economy
sure
with-
or didn't, most people think
well,
it's a
we have
bad
an economy
thing.
with low unemployment, high wages.
Yep.
Why is a trade deficit a bad thing for our economy?
So the example people like me like to give, which I don't really like to give, but I will give, is that when I get a haircut, I have a deficit with my barber. Right? I got a haircut.
You got a haircut and you paid for it.
And
Why
I
is
paid
that-
for it. But I
that's
gave him
fair.
money and he gave me nothing. He gave me a haircut. So when I import a product, they gave me a car or whatever that might be, but I gave them money. Now, it's more complicated than that. It's not a great example. I think the bigger piece of it is the first question that was asked earlier. So this is all merchandise trade. These are goods. There's also service trade. And I've tried digging into the service trade a little bit, and it's just very hard to get an accurate take on that because if there's probably some lawyers in the room, right? If you do a transaction that involves people outside this country and they're paying you, that becomes an export. But is anybody calculating that accurately? Can you calculate that accurately? I mean, what I know is that our country is still the most prosperous country in the world. We've been running large deficits forever for trade. Now, the budget deficit's a whole nother can of worms, I think. But a trade deficit, I think, we make it more important than it really is. I think I showed you the article I wrote that said the top 10 deficits with the U.S. And I got to admit, I felt a little bit guilty about that one because I know it's almost like clickbait. But the point in there is that some of those countries have very large imbalances with us, Vietnam and Ireland are two, and some of the countries like Canada and Mexico, they don't. I think the Canada number is probably 46% U.S. exports, 54% Canadian import, Canada's U.S. imports from Canada, so it's fairly balanced. Mexico is actually fairly balanced. Mexico buys a lot from us, a lot from our farmers in particular. But I think we pay way too much attention to deficits. It's fair to expect, it's reasonable to expect fair trade and people to play by the rules. And so if you do have countries, China being the biggest offender, that don't play by the rules, then it is hard to compete against them. Very hard to compete against them, particularly when they're demanding your IP, particularly when they're reverse engineering your products and so forth. But I think we pay way too much attention to deficits. I'll show you a little parlor trick if you want real quick. Any more questions? I'm gonna step aside just for a minute. Anybody got a question? Is there one? There's this gentleman up there. This guy up here has a question. And I'm gonna, oh, there you go. Let's get, where's my coward?
More of a comment. Isn't software considered a service? And our market-leading position in creating software, since it's counted as a service, it's not counted as a manufactured good. Wouldn't that change our deficits measurements?
So all right, so software, is it a service? Software is a service, particularly when there's no product that actually moves like in the old days. I'm trying to set something up back here for you guys. I'll show you a little parlor trick. Okay. I'm going to answer his question first. Okay, software. So yes, software is a good example, generally speaking, of something that is a service export, or it could be a service import for that matter, but tends to be a service export. So Microsoft, exports all over the world. In fact, Microsoft I live in Miami, there's a lot of Latin America headquarters, and so the Microsoft head of Latin America was in a group that we have for executives to get together. And they were pretty good at figuring out they could match the number of computers that were sold versus the software that was sold. And they found it was a big difference, a whole lot more computers than software, and that's how they sort of went at who was making illegal copies. Now with software as a service a little bit, I mean, nobody gets the big boxes anymore, right, with software. But yeah, it's definitely a service. Yes, sir.
With regard to the most topical tariff discussions, I can certainly understand the position of taking tariffs against China.
Mm-hmm.
But with regard to Mexico and Canada in particular, our two most valued trading partners, and the imbalances that you said, and the ins and outs and all those kind of things, if you were an advisor to either the president of Mexico or Justin Trudeau of Canada, what would you think their response should be to these bluffs, my word, of Trump's position with regard to tariffs against those two countries?
Well, first of all, I can't believe that you guys are listening to me, so much less the president of a country. But look, I've made my livelihood talking about trade and the benefits of trade. And so when I started this business, the United States was getting ready to enter into the FTAA, Free Trade Area of the Americas, which was going to be a hemispheric-wide trade agreement. There was all this optimism about that. Joe Biden is the first president since Jimmy Carter who did not touch a free trade agreement. Did not touch one. None. Trump redid Korea a little bit, and then obviously USMCA. But USMCA is the first free trade agreement without the word free trade agreement in it. And it's also the first free trade agreement, even though it was sort of a redo, that didn't expand trade. It sort of put some limits on it. So the mood has turned a little bit, and a lot of people have long been skeptical of free trade because they associate free trade with people lost their jobs, right? Jobs that were done in this country are now done in Mexico, are now done in China, are now done in Vietnam even maybe, but are done somewhere else, right? And so that mood, I mean, if you had to think of who would you say is the biggest free trader in the Senate or the House, is there anybody? Is anybody going to stand up for free trade anymore? So right now, we're pulling back and we're saying, the rules are different now. And we want people to trade with us, as we describe it, fairly. And we're not going to be the policeman for the whole world. How do I say this? So in the 1930s, 1920s, Congress passed a series of tariffs. And some people will tell you that Smoot-Hawley was a factor in the Great Depression. So there are some risks associated with using tariffs too widely because they will raise, I mean, how many people think tariffs will lower prices? How many people think they might have no effect? That's possible. That's possible. And how many people think they will have an effect and they'll raise prices? So, we'll see with the steel tariffs what happens. But when Trump did in his first term, steel prices went up, aluminum prices went up. Manufacturing eventually went down because the steel was too expensive. And my position on that is not that I don't care about the steel workers, but I think the next war is not going to be fought with big steamships rolling across the Pacific Ocean. Somebody's going to figure out how to shut our lights off, poison our water supply. That's the wars of the future. I don't think there'll be battlefields like there were in the past, if there are. But I know that for 70 years, since the end of World War II, we didn't get into a world war. So it's in that sense, that's a level of success, I would think. We learned our lesson. Nobody's dropped a nuclear bomb since we did twice. Nobody wants to do that, I don't think. So I'm going to do a little parlor trick just to show you something else we do. So I'm going to use Stuart Bell as my guinea pig. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the back of the room and I'm going to type your name in. And while I do that, I want you to think of any airport, seaport, or border crossing in the country that you'd like some information about their trade with the world, okay? And then I'll let you tell me what it is. So and I'll describe what we do while I set this up. So I'm going to type in, you can go ahead and turn that on, yeah. So it takes a second.
You want to see it?
See that, yeah.
Okay, you're gonna have to go back out,
Oh,
put it back to the.
so I'll just, while he's setting this up, I'll explain what so one thing we do is we do videos, and the way this started is I got an email from my mortgage company, and they said they had this video that was created, and it had my name in it, and it said, here's what your escrow will be for the next year, and here's what your taxes are, and here's your mortgage payment, and I thought, well, that's really kind of cool. And so I noticed at the bottom was the name of this company, and so I contacted the company, and it turns out it's an Israeli company called Edomo. And I said, I got this video, and I thought it was kind of neat. I'd like to do it with trade data. And so in their email to me, it had like my name and like 3 or 4 pieces of information. And so what we did is something a little bit different. Have you thought of the port you'd like me to use yet?
What about Everglades?
Port Everglades, okay. Any other questions while we wait? Did anybody have a last question for me?
NAFTA's impact?
Impact of NAFTA. Enormous impact, there we go. Oh, enormous impact on, the problem with trade is we all feel the impact of trade a little bit, and some people feel the adverse effects of it a lot. So there's probably not a person in here who has a stitch of clothing on that was made in this country. Period. You might, but probably not. There we go. So we're going to type in, we got up. So this is my little parlor trick to end on. So NAFTA's impact was enormous. I do ask the question when I'm at the border, these communities, whether it's Eagle Pass or Laredo or Far McAllen area, or Brownsville, or Del Rio, because I go to all these places. They're sort of poor, dusty communities. And the city of Eagle Pass, for example, gets 50% of its revenues from fees paid by trucks crossing their bridges. 50% of the revenues for that city. And I'm thinking, then why aren't they doing better? What's not happening here? And that I don't know the answer to, but NAFTA has been excellent for this hemisphere, I think. And I think USMCA will continue to be excellent for this hemisphere because that supply chain is the most integrated supply chain in the world. And it's been good on all fronts. So I'm going to type in Stuart Bell here. And I'm going to hope this works because it doesn't, sometimes it, so there's Stuart. You probably can't see in the back. Bell. And we're going to type in Everglades. Whoops. Oh, where are you? Oh, it's under Port, that's right. So I got to scroll down to Port Everglades. There we are. We're typing Port Everglades, and we're going to hit submit. You got the volume for me here, I hope? Yep. Okay. Whoop. Come, there you go. Okay. Oh, hold on. Hold on. There's Stuart Bell right in there. Oh, the volume's off. Hold on. There you go. It's on now. I'm going to restart it so you can hear it with the volume. There you go.
Let me just go and check that.
All right. Where's the volume? Where's the volume? Yeah, but the volume was not on for some reason. Nope. If you can pause that for a second. Whoops. Select a sound belt. Man,
growing exports in the current
there
month.
you go.
Here are your fastest growing imports in the current month. You can also inform your audience
There
of
you
your
go, it's
most
in there.
important
Scroll
trade
up. I think
partners
it's
or
just scroll
countries.
up.
There's more. With a number of exports,
And then hit
your
the,
port
there you go.
has
And
particular
now you can hit the
strengths
full screen
when
if you
compared
want.
to the nation's other 1,200 plus
There you go.
airports, seaports, and border.
Well, you get that. There you go. So the one they
Here are
sent me
your
had
port's monthly
like
trade
4 pieces
totals,
of information.
according to the
This
most
has
recent
hundreds.
U.S. Census Bureau data, as analyzed by World City. Here's a breakdown by total exports and total imports. Getting a little more granular, here are your top 3 exports by value and your top 3 imports by value, also in the most recent month. Take a look at what's trending.
They thought we were
Here
crazy.
are the fastest growing exports in the current month. Here are your fastest growing imports in the current month. You can also inform your audience of your most important trade partners or countries. There's more. With a number of exports, your port has particular strengths when compared to the nation's other 1,200 plus airports, seaports, and border crossings, including these 3.
Why perfumes?
Similarly, here are 3 imports where
Cruise
your port
industry.
also excels, with the port's national ranking in the current month. Here's a look at the year-to-date total trade, as well as the total exports and total imports. Previously, we were looking at only the current month. Here's your port's rank overall, and then, getting more specific, by mode of transportation. Let's close with the look at the change in your port's trade since last year, over the last 5 years, and over the last decade.
So again, he chose the port. So we can do it for any port in the country. So why would we want to do this? Because our clients are ports. So they buy these videos from us and they send them out to the people they want to be aware of their port. And some of them appear right on their websites. Oh, you know what is, put that back on. And no, don't bother. That's good enough. They've got enough of me. You got enough of me. That's great. Any other questions for me?
So why perfumes?
Perfumes is from the cruise industry. There's a lot of goods that go onto the cruise ships.
What's your definition of free trade?
Who are you talking to? Free trade is a good question. Fair trade's probably a better word, right? I like the idea that years ago, there still is a journalist by the name of Thomas Friedman, who some of you may know. He wrote a book years ago called The World is Flat. And the concept he had in that book, and it's since been cast aside, but at the time, no country with a McDonald's in it had we ever fought a war with, or something to that effect. Well, or something. It was something to that effect. That as long as you're doing business with people, you tend not to fight wars with them. And we tend to forget what wars are like, because if you think about it, we really haven't lost a lot of men or women in war since Vietnam. All the wars that have been involved, where we've been involved in recent years, we've had very limited casualties, right? Very limited. You know, it's 50. I think all of you have probably at some point been to the Vietnam Memorial, which at first I thought was a really ugly, hideous thing, but it's pretty magnificent when you're there and you see the little girl scratching her daddy's name in the thing. The concept where this all came from was out of World War II, was this desire to make countries, allow countries to trade with each other in the hope that they would get along better. My definition would be that people should, I don't have an overarching problem with reciprocal trade, which is this notion if you put tariffs on us, we'll put an equal one on you, with the exception of it's not going to work for Africa, it's not going to work in South America completely, it won't work in all countries, but it'll work in some. There's no reason that Germany or Japan or China or even Canada or Mexico should have higher tariffs on us than we have on them. There's no reason anymore. But some of the poorer countries, you could make the case that we can do a lot if we lift them up, because they become good markets for our exports. So my definition, that's as close as I can get to a decent definition. Is that similar to yours? Or a little different? Or you don't know?
I'll bow to you.
All right. Good.
Let's give him a big hand.